This is Crystal Ehart, and this is my final project, my portfolio for Social Work 5317 Diverse Populations. I'm going to start by discussing my photo voice journals. So, photo voice journals was a very new concept for me. I had never done or heard of a photo voice journal until this course. And I will say, in the beginning, when I was reading over my syllabus, the thought of it seemed very overwhelming. But as the semester moved on and progressed, I began to get used to the idea and the timeline and really enjoyed this extra element of adding photos and going out into the city and having to be creative to find a photo for what I was going to discuss that week. So, the first topic that we discussed this semester was racism, and my headline was what's in a name, and I chose to highlight a city called White Settlement, and in the photo you'll see a picture of the municipal complex sign. The reason I chose this was because this town actually stirred up some controversy about 10 years ago when city leaders argued that the name was limiting the city's progress. Now, with a town of about 80% white population, and when they brought this to vote, the the vote was no, it's not limiting our progress, and we don't want to change the name. So there were some manifestations of powerlessness. This would come from the mayor, who was trying to lead that change, as well as others in the town, maybe of minority groups or other Caucasian or white uh, um, people in this town that felt differently. So they obviously had a sense of powerlessness, and the exploiting came from a history of exploiting Native Americans. So if you read on the history of white settlement, you'll find that this area was settled originally by white people that were trying to get away from Native Americans, and they portrayed them as being evil and threatening. And it was the town's hopes to distract from the racism of the name by other accounts, they would say. So, how can I make things different? How can I change? Well, I work out in White Settlement. I know many people that are from that town, so I think I could be an advocate of change by having thoughtful discussions, talking to friends, and helping them understand that racism goes beyond individual racism. And this is a classic example of institutional racism, and just understanding what the difference is, and that just because you may not personally feel that you're a racist, it doesn't mean that there's not racism going on around you in other avenues. So, my next topic was nativism. So, this topic I called Is There an American Dream? And it was actually probably a little positive. I did a very positive spin on this, and I chose the restaurant El Phoenix, which was actually founded by an immigrant restaurateur. And I found his story to be fascinating. And I've always had a very positive image of immigrants. And I think because I came from immigrants, I'm not a Native American. So my ancestry, it comes from Europe. So somewhere down the line, I had ancestors that came here to America, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be an American. I wouldn't be living here. So I think that there's many stereotypes and misunderstandings that plague American immigrants. People, rather than asking questions and engaging and understanding, they just listen to the media and make a lot of assumptions. So there's a lot of marginalization when it comes to nativism. This idea that because I'm a citizen, I'm better than you, because you're not, because you're naturalized, or because you have a green card, or because of X, Y, Z, because you're not an American citizen, because you weren't born here, you're less than me. And we're losing sight of the American dream. So how can we protect that? So I can be a storyteller. I can be an advocate. I can tell the story of Mike Martinez, the immigrant worker that founded El Phoenix and ended up having 20 different restaurants around the DFW area, and eventually sold that and gave money back to his village in Mexico. So just these inspiring tales of immigrants, it is amazing, and those stories should be told. Next topic is sexism. So this was the first topic that I very much related to. And I highlighted a campaign called the See Her campaign. And this is a movement that I found this on MTV, which I thought was incredibly ironic, but the movement is to accurately portray women in various roles. So they highlight Olympic gold medalists, entrepreneurs, actresses, activists, and why I found it to be ironic is because it was on MTV, who has been exploiting women for years and years and years and years and years, probably since they became MTV. So now, because of all that exploitation, now we're trying to make up for it by having these movements. So we have cultural and institutional sexism seen here. And although I have seen a change, I think businesses are working harder to empower women and change those negative perceptions. It's disheartening to me that they're there in the first place, that historically women were needed for reproduction, I guess, and that we are worth so much more. So I'm glad to see campaigns such as this. I know Dove and Nike have done great jobs that I can think of off the top of my head, but we still have a long way to go. The next topic is heterosexism, and I chose to highlight an LGBTQ club in Fort Worth. This is called the Rainbow Lounge. I've actually been to this club, and it's a safe place for this community. So it's a place where people of the LGBTQ community or allies can go, listen to music, have fun. I had mixed emotions about this club because although I love that there is a sanctuary, there is a safe place in Fort Worth, I hate that it has to exist. So, people in the LGBTQ community have to deal with things such as bullying, abandonment, social misunderstandings, and also conforming to social norms. How many of us have known someone who has, made themselves to look or be or seem different because they're trying to conform to the social norms, and the reason is marginalization. I'm better than you because I like the opposite sex, or because I look a certain way, that is more accepting in our culture. And what can I do to change this? So educate through thoughtful communication and challenge those norms. So I when we had this topic, I actually had some very thoughtful discussions with some friends of mine. And just don't be afraid to ask questions, even if it means doing so in a way that starts with something along the lines of, hey, I don't really know how to address this, but I'm curious about this. My cisgenderism photo is an application for a US passport, and where I have marked a box in between male and female to indicate that there are some people that can't clearly identify with one or the other. So I questioned in this post, what is the value of knowing sex? So why do we need to know a gender on a passport application? If I am physically female, but I appear outwardly to be what someone might consider to look male, is checking that box going to help anyone better identify me, especially when I'm fully clothed? So transgender oppression begins with individual perceptions. It begins with those stereotypes. It begins with conditions of gender. And there's manifestations of powerlessness, of course. So there's this misunderstanding. There's all these questions about which restroom to use and how do I have to conform to be accepted. Institutional oppression is what's highlighted through this photo, with it being of an institute, the US government, right? And then how can I be an advocate for change? So facilitate those discussions, kind of as I had discussed in the heterosexism topic, and also using inclusive language, which can sometimes be challenging when it's something we're not used to dealing with a new, maybe a newer topic in our life. But don't be afraid to question, and just be thoughtful. Ableism was my next topic, and this is a photo of me and my friend Liz at the Rangers game. And Liz has cerebral palsy, and she is in a wheelchair. So in my post, I discussed how alike we are, yet how different we are, and how I have a very strong connection to ableism. I have a mother who is wheelchair bound, and then a very close friend who's wheelchair bound, among other things. And it's important for me that people see that the disabled are more than just their disability, that Liz and my mom are more than just their wheelchair. So there's manifestations of marginalization, powerlessness, and then also just being completely misunderstood. So how can we change that? By educating and communicating, by using inclusive language once again and advocating change and just thinking outside the box. Sometimes it's just a matter of stepping back and not putting your foot in your mouth, thinking about things before you say them. Next, I have adultism. So in my adultism post, I used a book called Reaching Teens. This is a program used to help caregivers engage teens rather than alienate them. Oftentimes, teens have senses of powerlessness. They're going through all these changes emotionally, hormonally, physically, learning to deal with different emotions, and it can be very challenging time for them, which can be a challenging time for adults that don't know how to deal with those behaviors. So it could potentially lead to violence, mental health issues, an overall sense of being misunderstood. And how can we fix this? How can we correct it? Through mentorship, giving those teens and kids a benefit of the doubt, and then an overall engagement and understanding with them. My ageism post is an empty classroom, but it was I know more than you, or do I? And it was based on a story of a coworker who was nearing retirement and recently gave up a class that she was teaching to nurse residents because she felt very disconnected to them. She felt as though they weren't very engaged, she wasn't engaging them well, and that there was this huge disconnect because of their age. So there were manifestations of marginalization, her feeling less than, her feeling like she couldn't connect, like they didn't connect with her, like she wasn't technologically savvy enough for them. And a lot of this, I think, was based on assumptions. So these assumptions that, oh, because from the younger generation, this assumption that, well, because you're old or older, then you must not understand technology. You must not know these things. But the but some of the stereotypes could go the other way as well. So um, I appreciate the knowledge that, or one of the ways that we can help this is by appreciating the knowledge that each one of us contribute to a particular task, and then understanding generational differences. So there are going to be some differences, but that's just an overall, once again, kind of a stereotype. And it doesn't mean that we are all that way. My most powerful post, I would say, was this one, which had to deal with classism. Um, I could probably talk about this picture forever, but I'm limited on time. So instead, I'll just say between the fences, if you really take a minute to look at this post, there's obvious differences between the status of the people on either side of the fence. We have a boy here who is in between the fences. He's fully clothed. He has on gloves and mittens and a scarf and a jacket. And on the other side of the fence, there are three people that look older than him, but barely clothed, huddled up, probably very cold. And so this not only shows us classism, difference in classism, but this is one of the first obvious intersections that I found that was just obvious to me. And it was with racism, possibly nativism, if these are immigrants. So huge intersections here. And I also think it's very valuable to acknowledge the fact that homelessness is oftentimes in our backyard. It's not always right there. It's not always on Rosedale. It's not always on Lancaster. Sometimes it's right in our backyard. So starting those conversations is how we can learn and educate, get to know your neighbors, get to know people around you, start those conversations, find out what you can do through local organizations, through your religious organizations, through your community. And lastly was religious oppression. So I called this a safe place among the chaos, and it's a chapel at Cook Children's Hospital. It attempts to respect various religions, but there's a large Christian mural, as you can see, in the very center of the chapel. So Christian hegemony is apparent, And it's a reminder that good intentions are not always executed properly. So we can request other texts and symbols and other faiths to be represented in the chapel would be a good action plan, which I'll discuss in a later slide.